All right, Masechet Eruvin, Daf Sadibet. We are continuing our discussion of cases where you have two courtyards adjacent to each other or other types of outdoor areas. So we'll have a little discussion on that. And then we're going to get to the next Mishnah, which is going to be talking about a big courtyard and a small courtyard that are adjacent, and some really interesting cases and principles that come from that. Okay, so we're starting with Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan yesterday was commenting on the opinion of Rabbi Shimon. Let's remind ourselves. Rabbi Shimon was of the opinion that all types of outdoor enclosed areas you can carry from one to the other without an eruv, right? So if I have my courtyard and my rooftop and my enclosed, gated area for storage, all I can go from one to the other. That's perfectly fine. That's Rabbi Shimon. Within Rabbi Shimon, there's a two-way split. Rav says that he's machmir. He says if one of the areas has a mechitza, right? This is, for example, let's say here. Let's say I live here in this house, and my courtyard, I do make an eruv. So I can carry from my house to my courtyard here, because even though I'm sharing it with other people, he says if I do that, then Rabbi Shimon would not allow me to carry from my courtyard to the next courtyard if I didn't make an eruv with them, if I only made my own eruv. The reason is a gezerah, because then I'm going to carry things from inside my house to outside, and then once it's outside, it will get mixed up with things that were already outside. And then I will carry all those things into the next courtyard. So that's the main principle. Rabbi Shimon says, I'm only allowed to carry anywhere things like a lawn chair that were already outside when Shabbat started, but not things that were in my house. And therefore, if I made an eruv, that actually makes it worse. It's better that I can carry from my house to my courtyard, but it makes it worse in terms of carrying from here to there. That was Rav, who was stringent. However, Shemuel and Rabbi Yochanan, we're about to talk about Rabbi Yochanan, they say it doesn't matter whether I make an eruv in my courtyard or not. Doesn't matter. Even if I do make an eruv, I'm not going to make a gezerah, right? Rabbi Shimon's principle is that anything that was outside when Shabbat started, I can carry everywhere. What about my book that was inside my house and I brought it outside on Shabbat? You can bring it outside to your courtyard. Just label it. Make sure you have in mind. Remember, this was in my house when Shabbat started. Therefore, I'm going to make sure not to carry it next door. You don't have to make a gezerah. All you have to do is keep track of all of your things. Okay, that was the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan. And so now we're going to ask a question to Rabbi Yochanan. Amar le Ravina le Rav Asher. Mi amar Rabbi Yochanan hachi. Did Rabbi Yochanan really say that you are allowed to carry from one courtyard to the next, even if you did make an eruv? We have a Mishnah that contradicts. Vaha amar Rabbi Yochanan halacha kistam Mishnah. Rabbi Yochanan has a general principle that we follow a stam Mishnah, and here is a stam Mishnah. Utanan kotel sheben sheteh hatzerot gavoa asara verochav arba'a ma'arevin shenaim ve'en me'arevin ehad. We have that famous case. I don't know if we still have a picture of it, but I don't have a picture of it. Okay. But you probably remember it. I have two courtyards side by side, a wall in the middle, and there's a plate of fruit on top of the wall in the middle. And the wall is high 10 tefachim by 4. So in that case, since there's a wall in the middle, each courtyard is separate. I have to make one eruv here and a separate eruv there. I can carry in each one separately. I cannot join them together because there's no opening in the wall, so I cannot make one eruv altogether. Hayu berosho perot. If there's a plate of fruit on top of the wall, elu olin mikan ve'ochlin, elu olin mikan ve'ochlim, bilbad shelo yoridu lamata. We can both go on top of the wall and we can eat together the fruit that was there, but we cannot take anything down. In other words, you can't carry from the wall to the courtyard, and certainly you wouldn't be able to carry from the courtyard, one courtyard to the other. Okay, that is the Mishnah. So that is a question. How is that a question? So you see, in this case, it doesn't really matter whether you made an eruv or not. It brings both. Brings both cases. You can make the two separate eruvs, eruvim. So in other words, here, let's say I made an eruv in my courtyard, and you made an eruv in your courtyard, and yet it says here that the fruit that's on top I cannot transfer, right? So that sounds like transferring from one courtyard to another is prohibited. And so if Rabbi Yochanan, who follows Rabbi Shimon, Rabbi Yochanan was the one that was lenient and said that you can carry from one courtyard to another, even if you did make an eruv. Yet here is a case where it seems they made an eruv, two separate eruvim, and it still says you cannot transfer. Okay, truth is, I think this case seems to be a little different because it's actually not transferring from the courtyard to a courtyard, but rather it's on the wall, and the wall is wide, and this four tefachim wide, as this actually creates its own reshut. But I think it's still a question here because if it was only one wall, only just my wall, and you weren't there, I would be able to carry from the wall because the wall becomes part of my chatzed. The problem here is that since the wall is shared, it's part of your courtyard and my courtyard. So if it were allowed to carry from your courtyard to my courtyard, then I would also be allowed to carry from the wall. Okay, so therefore, this is the question. Rabbi Yochanan beforehand was lenient and said that you can carry from courtyard to courtyard, whether or not you made an eruv. And in this case, he says, I cannot carry from the wall to my courtyard because it's shared with your courtyard. So now what do we do with all this? Well, here's the answer. My lemata, what does it mean that when it says here that as long as you don't bring the fruit down, my lemata lebatim, it doesn't mean that I can't bring it to my courtyard. I can bring the fruit to my courtyard. I just can't bring it. Lemata means all the way into my house. That would be obviously a problem according to everyone, to bring something from your courtyard into my house. That's of course would be a problem, and that's what that Mishnah means. But actually, I am allowed to take the fruit from on top and bring it down. Okay, good. We have an answer for Rabbi Yochanan. Hold on, not so fast. Rabbi Chia, he was Rabbi Yehuda Nasi's student, and he collected many baraitot, right? Many Tanaitic statements that weren't in the Mishnah were remembered and recorded by Rabbi Chia, and he taught a baraita that says about this. ובלבד שלא יהיה זה עומד במקומו ואוכל, וזה עומד במקומו ואוכל. In other words, if I want to eat the fruit, I have to be up on the roof. I cannot be on the ground in my courtyard and be taking from the fruit. And you can't do that either. So what do you see from here? That the word lemata means down into my courtyard. I am not allowed to transfer from the wall to my courtyard, and therefore by implication from your courtyard to my courtyard. And so it doesn't mean going all the way to the house. And so according to this baraita, we should be stringent, and that goes against Rabbi Yochanan, because Rabbi Yochanan says, according to Rabbi Shimon, that I can transfer from one to the other, even if there is an eruv, even if we have separate eruvin. So this baraita would seem to be a problem for the explanation that we gave to help Rabbi Yochanan. So we answered, Rav Ashi answers, V'chi Rabbi lo shena'a, Rabbi Chia minayin lo. Hold on, if Rabbi Yehuda Nasi did not include that detail, that explanation in the Mishnah, how would Rabbi Chia know it? Right? Rabbi Chia was only a student of Rabbi. And so therefore, we do not have to accept this baraita as authoritative. This baraita represents Rabbi Chia's interpretation, but it's not the peshat of the Mishnah, because those words are not actually in the Mishnah. And that way we resolve it. Okay, this is a good resolution. This line, I think, is extremely important. And we can think of what its applications are elsewhere. Rabbi Chia, this is not his own opinion. He taught a baraita, right? He was teaching this, repeating a Tanaitic opinion. And all over Shas, we're always taking Mishnayot and comparing them with Tosefta and Baraitot, and using the Baraitot as explanations of the Mishnah. Sometimes we accept them, sometimes there are different versions, but this is a general principle that something that's done throughout. So this is a very important statement because it's a limitation, and it says it's legitimate to think about the pshat of the Mishnah. The Mishnah is a standalone document, right? And you can read the Mishnah just for its words, and if you have to add too many words to the Mishnah to explain it, then that's not the pshat of the Mishnah, and we don't have to accept every baraita as an authoritative explanation of the Mishnah. The Mishnah can stand on its own. Okay, so this is a very important. I think it's not generally applied, but since we do have this principle, it's good to remember whenever we're studying Mishnah. In general, throughout history, people always study the Talmud or Mishnah together with the Talmud. Very rarely did people study Mishnah on its own. The first person to write a commentary only on Mishnah was Harambam, right? And this was like a revolutionary thing. Oh, you can see the Mishnah by itself. Well, obviously back then they didn't have a Gemara, so they were reading Mishnah by itself. And so, okay, this is a really important methodological principle. So we'll highlight it, and it's good to keep in our toolbox whenever it's relevant. All right, so that we answered Rabbi Yochanan, and now we're gonna talk about a variant case of courtyards next to each other, and in this case, there's two courtyards, but there's a ruin in the middle, and we'll see why that might make a difference. Itimad, shete chatzerot vechurba achat benehem, achat erba ve'achat lo erba. We have a picture of this. So we have here's my home and the courtyard, my home, the courtyard, and there's a ruin, right, a dilapidated building in the middle. And this would be a case where one person made an eruv, right? These people made an eruv in their courtyard, so they would be allowed to carry in and out from their home to the courtyard and the churbah, whereas these people did not make an eruv and they would not be able to. But they do share this churbah in the middle. So what would be the law? Amar Rav Huna, notnin ota lazo shelo irva. אבל לשערבה לא, דילמה תלפוקי מנה דבתים לחורבה. So we give the entire ruin to the person that did not make an eruv. Seems counterintuitive, right? If you made an eruv, shouldn't that be better? No, because we have that gezerah. Remember, this Rav Huna is a student of Rav, so all this is following the opinion of Rav. Rav's the one that said that even according to the Bishimon, if I made an eruv in my courtyard, then I can carry from my home to the courtyard, but that's a problem because now in my courtyard there's going to be mixed things that were there from before Shabbat and things I brought out, and that makes it more prohibited, right? Because I don't want to mix them up, and therefore I'm not allowed to carry anything to the next courtyard. And so therefore, let's say this guy made an eruv, so now he has things from his home out here. And that's not going to be good because then he's going to make a mistake and bring those things to the next courtyard. So therefore, we prohibit him. But this guy who did not make an eruv, he's not going to carry anything from inside his house to outside. Everything's going to be outside already. So his lawn chairs and stuff, he can then take it from outside and put it in the churbah. And we give him the entire churbah. He can access the entire churbah, carry things in and out to his courtyard. And this guy is prohibited from using it at all. Okay, so that's Rav Huna. It's simply an application of what Rav says. Okay, that's Rav Huna's opinion. However, Rav Huna was a student of Rav, but Rav also had a son, B'chiya bar Rav Amar. So Rav said something, but there's now two interpretations, one from his student, one from his son. And the son says, Af l'she'irba. That's the only words that he said. Af l'she'irba. Also the one who made an eruv. Now, what does it mean also? It's a bit ambiguous. So our interpretation right now is af l'she'irba means ushtehem asurot. We give it to both. Well, once it's accessible by both, then actually causes a problem because since the one who made an eruv has a prohibition of carrying things outdoors, because that's Rav's opinion, and since he's not allowed, he imposes a restriction on the other guy who did not make an eruv, and now no one is allowed to use it. So that's Rabbi Chiya bar Rav's opinion, according to this interpretation, right? Actually, all he said was af l'she'irba, and we're interpreting it to mean ushtehen asurot. Now, that's not the only interpretation. You can say af l'she'irba means, and also the one who made an eruv is permitted, and they're both permitted. So no, we don't say that. If you think that Chiya bar Rav meant by af l'she'irba, by those words that both of them are permitted, in the general case, not when there's a ruin, just two courtyards back to back, why in that case would you not give the chatzer that was not, that you did not make an eruv to the chatzer that you did make an eruv? In other words, just like in this case, If you would say that they're both permitted, why would you say they're both permitted? Because right, one guy did not make an eruv. One guy made an eruv. One guy did not make an eruv. And so in this case, it doesn't make sense to say they're both permitted, because then the same thing you would apply, and when there's two chatzerot side by side, and one made an eruv, one didn't make an eruv. But Rav never said that. Truth is, Rav only spoke about a case where either both did make an eruv or both did not make an eruv. And in the case where both people did make an eruv, let's say no churba, just a regular case, and when both do make an eruv, then he applies the gezerah, that I cannot carry out here because I might come to here, and you cannot carry because I might come to here. He didn't actually speak about a case when only one person makes an eruv, and in that case, maybe you would be more lenient and say, well, since I made an eruv, and so I have a lot of things out here, so I should be able to take things from, I should be able to take things from the non-eruv courtyard and bring it into mine, because there's no chance that those will be from your house because you didn't make an eruv. So it should be able to go one way, but then not the other way. But he didn't say that there, so therefore we shouldn't say that here. So that's why we're going to say in this case also, both of them are prohibited. Okay, that's so shouldn't we say that? And therefore we should not apply this principle and say they're both allowed? Not necessarily. Hatam, so in other words, Chiyah Barabas says afla she'erva. At first we say that means they're both prohibited. Then we say maybe they're both permitted, right? Well, what about the other case of when there's no ruin? There's actually a difference between them, if there is a ruin or not a ruin. Hatam kevan demin tareh maneh debatim bechaser atel apukeh. In the case of two courtyards with no ruin, so courtyard is enclosed and things are protected there. Therefore, likely to put things out in the courtyard, a lot of things, and then they'll get confused. And this is a good reason to make a gezerah, even if only one person made an eruv, that you shouldn't carry at all. But in the case of a ruin, since a ruin is accessible by the public, it tends to be vandalized. So people don't keep things in a ruin that are important to them. Therefore, you can actually be more lenient in the case of the ruin, because people are not going to put a lot of things in there, and therefore the one or two things that you might put in there that aren't so important, you can keep track of and know, oh, this came from the house, and so there's less of a reason to make a gezerah. So in fact, we end up saying it is actually possible that in this case, Rav would say that they are both permitted to use the churba. All right, all that was one version. Now we're just going to give a second version, just where everything's flipped, but all the reasoning is the same. Ika de amre, Chiyah barav amar afle she'erba. So Chiyah said in the name of his father that in the case of this ruin, where one side does make an eruv and one side doesn't make an eruv, then afle she'erba, and now we're interpreting it to mean shtehen mutarot, and you can carry in both of them, right? We give both of them access to the churba. And if you'll say, maybe you should interpret it the opposite way, that both of them are prohibited. Just like in the case where if it was two courtyards without a ruin, that also we would prohibit both of them. Remember, because Rav only said that it's okay, it's prohibited in the case, similar to the case of when both of them make an eruv separately. So too, if only one makes an eruv, then also should be prohibited. So why don't you say they're both prohibited? No, hatam kevan demin tareh maneh debatim bechaser la sharu behuda banan tela pukeh ava bechurba la min tareh. No, and it's different. In a case where if two courtyards protect items, and therefore everybody will bring out a lot of items. The one who made an eruv will bring out a lot of items from his home to the courtyard, and then there's a reason to make a gezerah. Now we're going to forget which ones came from the house, which ones were there from before Shabbat, and you're going to carry from one to the other. So therefore you say both are not allowed. But if in the case of a churba, where people don't keep things in a churba because it's not protected, therefore there's no reason to make a gezerah, and in fact, therefore both can be permitted. Okay, so that's just really the same reasoning, the opposite way. Okay, that concludes that the discussion of the Mishnah of two courtyards together. And so next Mishnah is now a variation. It's also like two courtyards together, but they're different size. We saw these cases much earlier in the Masechet, but this is the main place for them. Okay, the case is as follows: Gag gadol samuch lekatan. Hagadol mutar, vakatan asur. Let's see this case as in the picture. Rooftop. Where's the picture of the rooftop? It doesn't have it. Okay. Okay. Imagine this is a rooftop then. We have a big one home. That's a big home has a rooftop, and a smaller home also has a rooftop. So in such a case, we say the halacha is hagadol mutar vakatan asur, and the large one I'm allowed to carry from my apartment down, but my house I can carry up onto the roof. Why? Because it has enough walls. Even if the roof is flat, right? Still has three sides, and so we say gud asik on the three external walls, and it also has this little section and this little section, and so therefore it has enough for three walls and two and partial walls on the fourth side. So the big home is all enclosed. However, it's attached to a small home, and the smaller one, imagine this is a rooftop with no walls. So for three sides, it has sides of the building, and those go up all the way. But this one is adjacent to the larger home. The adjacent wall underneath, right, indoors, there is a wall there. But you can't see that wall, and so therefore that wall, well, depending on the interpretation, right? That wall is not existent, and therefore the small house has only three walls and is not enclosed, and therefore we cannot carry in the small home. So the owner of the small home cannot carry from his house up onto the top, onto his roof. Okay, and the same principle would be not on a roof, but rather in a courtyard. חסר גדולה שנפרסה לקטנה, גדולה מותרת וקטנה אסורה, מפני שהיא כפתחה של גדולה. Same thing. So this is the actual picture here. If I have, one person owns this, another person owns the small one. So the owner of the big one, they have 1, 2, 3 walls plus these pieces of wall. We have to assume that this opening is less than 10 amot. If it is less than 10 amot, then I have partial walls, and this can be simply an opening. So that's fine. So I have an enclosed area, and therefore, in my closed area, I can, if I own it by myself, I can carry in the whole thing. If I own it with someone else, I make an eruv, and we can carry in the whole thing, and that's perfectly fine. However, the owner, the small one, has only 1, 2, 3 walls. This side is completely open. So only 3 walls, no good. If I own it by myself, I can't carry. Even if I own it with other people, even if I make an eruv, I can't make an eruv because I have to be enclosed first in order to be able to make an eruv. Therefore, the people in the small courtyard cannot carry. Okay, of course, if they make an eruv all together, then that would be okay because then it's all one big enclosed area. But we're not talking about that case. We're talking about when it's separated. All right, so we have these two cases that are basically the same thing. So the Gemara immediately asks, why have to tell me both these cases? Just one's on top of a roof and one's on the floor, but they're basically the same thing. So why need both? Lerav katani gag dumya dechaser. Ma chaser min kera mechisata. Afgag name min kera machisata. So according to Rav, Rav says that the reason why on the roof you don't consider the middle wall to be a good wall is because you can't see it, right? Whereas the outside walls, I can see the side of the apartment building and say those go up, but the shared wall that's between the big and small home cannot be seen. And so why do I have two cases? So that you'll compare them. There's a similarity between the roof and the courtyard, and I learned one from the other. Just like in a courtyard, the walls are seen, right? Because they're coming from the ground and it's a fence. So too, all walls have to be walls that are seen in order to be valid. So also in the roof, The outside walls I can see, and therefore I can extend them up, good asik. But the middle shared wall, it's only an interior wall, I can't see on the roof. And therefore, we do not say that that goes up, and that's why I can carry in the big one, because it has partial walls, but not in the small one that has, it's all open. And that is what Rav does. Shemuel, however, says, Gag dumya de chaser. Ma chaser de kadarse larabim, af gag name de kadarse lerabim. Shemuel actually said in the case of the roof that you could say good asik, even in the middle one. He was more lenient. However, only if that's only if it's not used. But if people from the small one, they tend to go up on their roof and use it a lot, and they walk back and forth on the rooftops, then this is a good, you don't say good asik when people are treading over it, right? This is a legal fiction that a wall extends up. But if the legal fiction is broken, if there are people that are actually walking back and forth on top of where that wall is, right, that breaks the legal fiction. And therefore, even according to Shemuel, who would normally be lenient and say you can use the entire rooftop, if there are people that live up there and or use it regularly, then you do not say good asik, and then he would agree with the halacha of the Mishnah. And so, why, according to Shemuel, why do you need two cases? Again, also to compare them. Just like a chaser has to be a place where that people walk on, so too a rooftop is one where people walk on. That's when it would be prohibited from carrying in the small one. But if there was nobody around, then it would be okay. All right, good. Now we get to the really interesting series of theory of cases. So these three sages were sitting together studying. Abaye also was sitting next to them. And the three sages were saying as follows: Shema minam metnitin, diure gedola baketana, ve'en diure ketana begedola. It means that this we can learn from the Mishnah that the right of residence of the large one extend into the small one. In other words, if I live in the big one, so then the small one is considered an entranceway. Therefore, for the people in the big courtyard, the small courtyard is kind of like a foyer, right? That belongs to them, because after all, we considering that an entranceway. And so therefore the small courtyard actually gets subsumed into the large courtyard. And for various halachot, this is going to be important, both the kula and the chumrah, that the small courtyard is considered part of the large courtyard. But not the other way around, because for the small courtyard, they are separated from the large courtyard, right? They have an open wall there, and so it's just three sides with an opening. It's worse than an opening, right? For the big courtyard, they have a doorway. Fine, a doorway enters, it goes into something that you can access. But for the people in the small courtyard, they just have an open wall, an open side, and therefore no access. So they would not subsume the big one. Okay, now we're going to see a series of, I think, 5 applications of this principle. Ketzad. Gefanim bagedola asur lizroa et ketana. Vim zara zera'in asurin. So we're talking about kil'ayim, which means you're not allowed to plant together vines and other crops. And so if I had a case where I put vines in the big one, so I would not be allowed to, here's the vines in the big one, I would not be allowed to put other plants in the small one, even though they are separate courtyards owned by different people. But nevertheless, it's not allowed because for the big one, this is simply a doorway to open up to this, and therefore the small one gets subsumed into the big one. So from the perspective of the people that live in the big courtyard, the small courtyard is actually part of their courtyard, and therefore, if I have vines here, I am not allowed to plant vines in the entirety of the small one. And if I did, then those would be prohibited. I would not be able to use them, to eat them, to derive benefit from them. Okay, that's the first application. Gefanim mutarim. Right, so the plants would be prohibited. The vines that are in the big one are fine because the vines are in their own area. So these are fine. These wouldn't prohibit these, but these would prohibit those. Okay, gefanim baketana mutar lizroa et hagedola. If I put gefanim vines in the small one, then I would be allowed to plant things in the big one. So we're considering kind of the vines to be the right to be kind of the main thing. So if I have plants here, so the plants here are okay. And in this case, since the vines, which are kind of the main thing, they're more important, are here. Well, the thing that's outside in the big courtyard does not get subsumed into the small courtyard. That was our principle, right? Small courtyard becomes subsumed in the big one, but not the other way around. And so now we have the main thing is in the small one. The big one does not get subsumed, and therefore this is that situation would be permitted. Okay, here I think it'll be clear when you see more cases. Isha bagedola veget baketana. There's a halacha. If a woman wants to get a divorce, generally you'd hand it to her, but you don't have to hand it to her. If she is in a courtyard, we can throw it into the courtyard where she is, right? And that way she can acquire it by being in the same courtyard. But the get has to enter into her domain, not the other way around. So if I have a woman and she's in the big courtyard, and then so the husband places the get in the small one, she is divorced. Why? Because she's the main thing, right? And the small one is subsumed into the big one. And so therefore the get, which is in the small one, gets subsumed into the large one where she is, and she acquires the get. That works. But if it was the other way around, if the woman was in the small courtyard and then he threw the get into the large courtyard, it's not good because she is the main thing and the large courtyard does not get subsumed into there. So that would be a case where the get is acquiring the woman. You can't do it that way. She has to acquire the get. Okay, so that's I think a clear example. Another example, sibur bagedola ushliach sibur baketana. If I have 10 people in Minyan, they're in the courtyard, in the big courtyard, and you have the chazan, he's in the little courtyard. Yosini dechovatan, that's okay because you have the majority of the people, right? They are the main thing, and so since they're in the big courtyard, they can subsume, bring in the small courtyard, and then the chazan is with them. But if it was the other way around, if sibur baketana ushliach sibur bagedola, and Yosini Dechova, 10 people in the small courtyard, then they are the main thing. So we're looking at it from their perspective. And from their perspective, they are separate from the large courtyard. And then that would mean the chazan is like in a separate room altogether. And so they don't have a chazan. And so they do not fulfill their obligation. They do not have they have a minyan by themselves, but they don't have anyone reading the Torah or reading the prayers. So they did not fulfill their obligation, even though they're hearing the chazan and saying amen. They didn't say shacharit. Okay, this is actually quite an interesting case because it does happen, in the old Middle Eastern synagogues. The chazan goes up on a high stage, like the stage thing in the middle, like Achiezer still has it, right? And you go up the thing, and Sheretz Israel still has it, and that where the chazan is actually becomes its own domain because it's 10 tefachim high and 4 tefachim wide, and in that sense, it's the chazan is in a separate area than everybody else, right? So perhaps we could apply this principle. It's not exactly the same. That might be an actual different shoot, but okay. Obviously, it's okay. They're all within the same roof in that case. So be okay. But what if it was an outdoor space, and it could in certain situation be a problem. Okay. So anyway, in this case is okay if the 10 are together and only the one's not there. That's the chazan case. Similar case with 9. Tisha bagedola v'yachid baketana. Now, I'm not talking about a chazan, just we're trying to get a minyan. You have 9 people in the large courtyard and 1 person in the small courtyard. Mistarfin, that's okay because the 9 is the majority. So we're going to look at things from their perspective, and from their perspective in the large courtyard, they can subsume the small courtyard. However, Tisha b'ketana ve'achad b'gedola and mistarfin. If the 9 are in the small courtyard, then we have to look at things from their perspective because they're the main thing. And from their perspective, the 1 is outside, and then that would not be okay. All right, this could have an application to Zoom Minyanim. I know there's a lot of discussion about this, and so we do not think that Zoom Minyanim are okay. But I wonder if, one day when we think about it more, if they have 10 people all on Zoom, so then it's no good because they can't join together. But let's say you have 9 people in a physical place and 1 person on Zoom, right? Maybe you can make an argument that that's like a chaser gedola. There's the 9 people there, and the 1 person on Zoom is like chaser ketana, and so perhaps you can in some way subsume that. All right, that's not halacha l'maaseh. Just a thought that there could be a difference in these cases where it's like somewhat somewhat of a connection, but not a full connection. It could make a difference whether you have the majority in one place. All right, and last example, so'a b'gedola asur likrot kriyat shema b'ketana. You're not allowed to say shema when you're in the presence of excrement. So if you have the so'a is in the large one and a person saying shema is in the small one, then that's no good because then the so'a is like is a big presence, and he's going to be drawn, and he's in the small one, he's going to be drawn into the big one and be in its presence. However, if the so'a b'ketana, we're seeing things from the perspective of the so'a, interestingly here, not the person, then that's in its own domain. It's separate. Mutar likrot kriyat shema b'gedola, and so that is then separate. And I'm in the big one. I can say shema in the big one and be separated from the so'a. All right, so that fantastic number of various cases that all that are all different applications of this principle that we learned from our Mishnah. Okay, one last question and answer. Amar lehu Abaye, אם כן, מסינו מחיצה לאיסור, שאלמלא אין מחיצה, מרחיק 4 אמות וזורע. Okay, regarding the first application you had of this one, so in general, the law of kilayim is that, let's say I have vines here, and I want to plant something else. I only have to separate it 4 amot, and then I can plant over here, right? As long as I have a space. That's the usual case, right? If in a big field, I just have to put some space. However, in this case, what we see here is by having a wall, right? And because from the perspective of the big one, there is a wall here, a partial wall, so it's an opening. And so by having a wall, now I am not allowed to plant anything in this entire little one. And even if I leave 4 amot. So what a kind of a paradox is this? That actually, if there was no wall here, if this was all straight, I would be able to plant here. But by having a wall, and you think adding a wall should be a bigger partition and should be more lenient. But here, by having a wall, it makes it more stringent. So isn't that kind of paradoxical? All right? Mechitza le'isur. Because if there was not mechitza, I could leave 4 amot and plant. And now I can't do it in the whole thing. Now, why can't I do it in the whole thing? Because the entire little courtyard is subsumed into the big courtyard. And it's as if there's no space there, right? We kind of contract the space into it. And that's why the whole thing is not allowed. But how could that be? So this is a question. And so the Biza is going to answer. What, are you making a general principle that adding a wall is always going to be more prohibitive? Not necessarily. I'm going to show you a case where you can add a wall and yet it will become, but usually adding a wall makes it more lenient. But I'll show you a case where adding a wall will make it more a bigger problem. As follows. The case that we were just talking about of this of our big small courtyard and small courtyard. But look at this case, right? I have the big courtyard and the small courtyard. Let's say I add walls. I add walls like as follows, here and here. By adding these walls, now what happens? The big courtyard becomes the same width as the little courtyard. And if they're the same, once they're the same width, now there is no wall at all, not for the little courtyard and not even for the big one. See, when I had no walls, then the partial wall here and the partial wall here can extend, and this is just an opening. And now in that case, I could have carried in the big courtyard. But once I add walls, now it becomes prohibited because now there's no partial wall here. So here, see, I have a case where by adding walls, I actually make it more prohibited, right? So this is a counterexample to your rule that adding walls should they make things more lenient. So he answers, Amale, Hatam siluk mechisotu. No, weren't really adding walls. You were actually taking away walls. I had these walls here on the sides, right, that was sticking out. And now by putting these walls in, you're actually removing these walls. So your net effect is actually to remove a partition. You're making this partition inaccessible and thereby removing. So your example is not a counterexample, although technically, yes, by adding these walls, you're making it more prohibited, but your addition is really a subtraction of these walls. And so that's not a good example. Okay, and the next stuff we'll see many more examples, applications of this principle that can a mechitza be leisur? Can adding a wall ever make the situation worse, more prohibited? But we'll see that on the next stuff. Baruch Adonai.